Hello people of the internet, welcome to Paint to Life, episode 31. Tonight, I'm going to be painting a WizKids Pathfinder Deep Cuts Minotaur Labyrinth Guardian. That's another undead. That's 2 for 2. Paladins out there be getting thick. So while I paint this one to life in true D&D fashion, I'm going to tell you the story of King Kilgore, a Minotaur king of the Isle of Tetris in the Whalebones, which is an archipelago to the west of the Sword Coast in Faerun. So with that, I'm GM Atank. Let's get painting. Okay, let's get started. If you missed last week's Paint to Life, it was Gulcott, the Forever King. You can find it in the link right there. It was a really good episode, very well received. Not a lot of people saw it though, so if you missed it, I definitely suggest you check that one out. So what is a Minotaur Labyrinth Guardian exactly? The truth is, I don't really know. It's a monster from Pathfinder, which I don't play. I play Dungeons & Dragons, so let's do some figuring together. So firstly, what exactly is a Minotaur? Body of a man, head of a bull, super badass, live in labyrinths. They're carnivorous, they eat human flesh, they can see in the dark with complete dark vision, and they were masterful at puzzles, and they could always find their way out and remember a route they'd already taken, which is why they were masters of labyrinths. And in Greek mythology, there was Theseus, and the string, and a Minotaur. Having high school flashbacks here. It doesn't matter. That's what a Minotaur is. So secondly, what's a labyrinth? Well, A Labyrinth was a great movie from the 80s that had my ex-girlfriend Jennifer Connelly in it. It's a 3D maze. It can be made out of hedges. It can be made out of stones. It's typically a dungeon with traps and or locked doors to keep people lost forever, permanently trapped. In Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of dungeons could be labyrinths if you want to drive your players crazy if they're trying to map it, but for the most part, it's just a kind of cool setting to have an adventure in. And thirdly, what is a guardian? Well, Webster's defines guardian as a defender, protector, or keeper, self-appointed guardians of public morality. So, there you have it, a Minotaur Labyrinth Guardian, an MLG. Stop. But who is our Minotaur Labyrinth Guardian? In the city of Waterdeep lived a gnomish family named Nimnackle. Now, they had a son named Bodyknock, and at a very young age, Bodyknock was special. They didn't really understand why, but we would understand it as autistic. He was sensitive to lights and sounds. He spent a lot of his free time drawing maps and mazes, and at nighttime he would look up and trace and draw out constellations in the sky. Additionally, he would never say a word to anyone, other than the occasional mumbles to himself. When he began his early adult life in his 40s, he was still living at home with his parents as he wasn't capable of taking care of himself, but he was spectacular at something. He would create gardens, hedgerows, into mazes, and they were in high demand in Waterdeep as they were beautifully designed and complex in their creation. Now, one summer, a traveling sailor named Mercutio was visiting Waterdeep, and he saw some of these gardens with his own eyes. So he investigated and he tracked down the creator, Bodyknock, and he found him working in a hedgerow at the end of a passageway with clippers and whispering to himself. Now, Mercutio recognized an opportunity when he saw one. Being alone with the 2'7" gnome, he just abducted him. He put him in a burlap sack. Bodyknock just went limp and sat there, and Mercutio took him back to his ship with him. Now, when he was dumped out of the bag, he found himself on the ocean sailing west to the Whalebones, to the Isle of Tetris. Now, when they arrived, Mercutio presents Bodyknock to King Kilgore. King Kilgore is an imposing Minotaur with great strength, and he has a fascination with puzzles, mazes, and an ultimate desire to create the perfect dungeon. However, when prompted to talk more about these hedge mazes that Mercutio saw in Waterdeep, of course, Bodyknock doesn't say anything beyond muttering to himself. So this embarrasses and shames Mercutio, who leaves empty-handed, luckily with his head, and the offended Kilgore decides to put Bodyknock in a tower where there's nothing but a small square window on the ceiling that looks up to the sky, and they leave him there. Now, every night that passes, the Minotaur guards, who are quite observant, notice the small gnome on his knees looking straight up at the little teeny patch of sky he sees and feverishly tracing with his finger on the stones. So they provide him with some ink and quills, and that's when stuff really starts to happen. Bodyknock starts to create all kinds of mazes, diagrams, blueprints, star charts, And this is quite spectacular. When King Kilgore hears of this, he's blown away by the complexity of what he sees. So he orders his builders to begin constructing what is written on the page and making it a reality on the Isle of Tetris. It's a massive undertaking, and it's built outwardly from the center out. And with all the strange symbols and arcane and angles from Bodynock's mazes built exactly as he's described them in his writings. And from the very beginning stages, strange is certainly the status quo of the project. Firstly, once the center was constructed, the main entrance, anyone who entered that was never seen again. Secondly, builders, even skilled builders, working alongside the outer perimeter walls outside, would sometimes stray off and wander and disappear for 10 minutes only to return having aged 5 years and having no understanding of where they had been and being disoriented. Finally, all kinds of strange beasts from the planet Toro would occasionally just wander out of the exit tunnel from the maze. I mean, they would be confused and frightened at their new location, but a polar bear, a yeti, all kinds of things that had no business being on the Isle of Tetris would wander out. The funniest of the bunch was the one time those two humans came stumbling out. They were odd. They were wearing weird black clothes with skull pins on their hats. They had red, white, and black symbols on their arms, and they screamed in terror at the sight of the Minotaurs, who of course chased them, cooked them, and ate them. Now, ultimately, Bodynock finished his work. He had been moved to a tower nearby the job site, one that had lots of room for him to write. It had large open sky windows so he could look, and he even had a telescope that he would whisper fervorously to himself as he used. But he was done. So now complete, King Kilgore was ready to enter the maze for the very first time. And of course, he brought the lead designer, Bodynock, with him, just in case. So they descended into the center entrance, and Kilgore immediately began to try and solve the maze, Bodynock close to his heels. They walked for days, a seemingly impossible task given the finite space and size constraints of the dungeon that they were in. Some hallways and rooms had mosaic tile, some were modeled after caves with certain carvings, and yet some others looked like fieldstone dungeon walls. There was flora and fauna growing, water flowing in some spots, creatures skittering about here and there, and many signs of death around them, including corpses of bones long picked clean of any valuables by who knows what. One room they entered had symbols and buttons everywhere, which spun to life as soon as Bodynock crossed the threshold, and a disembodied voice said, "Welcome, Dungeon Master," to Bodynock's cheerful grin and Kilgore's noticeable disdain. But ultimately, Kilgore gave up. He could not solve the labyrinth, so he tapped Bodynock and said, "Take us out of here." 15 minutes? Bodynock had them out. Absolutely astonished with how well the maze worked, Kilgore named the maze the Mysterium and scheduled a great feast where he would invite all of his friends as well as his rivals to show them the greatness of his construction and let them marvel at his creation. So there was the day of the unveiling. Emissaries, pirates, clan leaders, including Mercutio, who caused Bodynock to cower when he saw him. They all arrived to see this magnificent labyrinth. Now, the king told his most elite guards about his true intentions. His plan was to rid himself of any political enemies or opponents or anyone who disapproved of his rule. Today, here in this dungeon, only those who pledged fealty to King Kilgore would be allowed to leave. So King Kilgore leads this procession down into the Mysterium, right in the center, and the Minotaurs then split up with parties and prepare for their brutal culling. Kilgore and Bodynock traveled to the exit tunnel, and when they arrived, Kilgore spoke. He said, "Bodynock, you have made me a beautiful creation. I am so proud of you." The little gnome looked up and said, "Thank you," the first time he had ever spoke. However, Kilgore followed with, "But alas, I cannot allow anyone to know the secrets of the Mysterium," and broke the small gnome's neck like a carrot. Bodynock slumped to the ground in the wall, a small tear in his eye. Calmly, Kilgore then blew his horn. This was the signal that the culling was to begin, and he did not notice that Bodynock's body slowly descended into the wall and the floor, disappearing from sight. Suddenly, much to his surprise, the ground around them shook. Kilgore almost fell to his knees, and the door at the end of the hall in front of him to the exit suddenly was gone, leaving only a dead end in front of him. The king stumbled around, looking to find his bearings, looking to find any trace of where he was, but something had changed. All around him, wails and screams of combat surrounded him from all directions, as well as an uncomfortable whispering and the feeling of being watched. He finally met up with some of his soldiers in Mercutio, and they fought together their way through enemies and other strange beasts from inside the labyrinth, some with wicked teeth and claws, some without faces at all, just flat spaces where faces should be. Finally ahead, Mercutio saw the small gnome body knock, and he was opening a door, which opened up leading to natural light outside. They could see the jungle, and he hollered a command and ran towards the gnome with the soldiers. Now meanwhile, back on the Isle of Tetris, the civilians were trying to make sense of what happened to their king, his entourage, and the entire Mysterium, as nothing remained other than a massive hole in the ground where the labyrinth once was. Now back in the labyrinth, the men were closing in on the door, and King Kilgore caught the glimpse of the gnome's small stature, and through the flickering torchlight saw the slightest little smirk on his face as he closed the door behind him. "Don't open the door!" the king cried, but it was too late as Mercutio violently flung open the door. There was an explosion of sound as the door violently blew open, sucking Mercutio and the soldiers out into a black, starry void nearby a glowing blue planet. The labyrinth was orbiting the planet Toril. With all of his strength, King Kilgore pulled himself towards, resisting the suction of the void, and managed to close the dungeon door with a loud thud. Now, all alone, hopelessly lost, he kept searching. Hours later, he found that central control room that had spoken to Body Knock earlier. It was glowing purple with lights flashing on control panels, alien technology he had never seen before. As he crossed the threshold into the room, a disembodied voice cried out, "Dungeon Master position available. Are you the guardian of this dungeon?" Defiantly, the Minotaur looked around and shouted, "Yes! Show me the secrets of this place!" The king felt his skin tightening under his armor. His heart began to slow, his eyes burned, and everything looked blue until they sucked back into their sockets. His scream broke into a terrifying wail as his soul drained out of his essence into the void. His transformation into an undead creature was complete. Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen a closet door just kind of open on its own? You be careful around places like that. It could be a hidden portal into the domain of Kilgore, the guardian of the Mysterium. All right, here's my finished MLG. Enough overseeing his orbital labyrinth for eternity for the shelf. Anyways, I hope you liked my story tonight. If you did, please leave me some feedback in the comments below. I love to read it. Saturday, October 17th at 1 o'clock Eastern, I will be attending an in-store painting event at one of my friendly local gaming stores, Phoenix Rising in St. Catharines. So the subject of that paint job will be the next week, our penultimate Halloween episode's Paint to Life topic. So there's that. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow. I really appreciate that. And that's all I have for you for tonight, guys. I'm GM Atank. Wash your hands, people. They had a son. Excuse me one second while I take this. Boom.